Look at that. I follow directions. All right. I'm Kelly tonight. I'm Kelly, everyone. I'm an alcoholic. I am sober through God's grace in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am still one drink away from drunk. Thank God I know that today. My sobriety date is September 1st, 1994. And I still am amazed that 28 years later, I am still blown away by the love and the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, this is literally the best thing that's ever happened to me. And it was a gift that I really didn't want. I didn't think I wanted. You know, when I got here, I was really skeptical that I would ever enjoy life without alcohol. I was terrified of the thought, but I knew in the marrow of my bones that I was an alcoholic. I knew that I had already, by the time I got here, I was very young. By the time I got here, I had already done so many nevers. I'd already had so much life. I only got to drink for about 6 years, which is really sad, kind of. I mean, I get bummed when I hear people share they got to drink so much longer than me, but in those 6 years, I did a lot of living and a lot of drinking. And alcohol was like, man, I needed something, to be honest. I think booze kind of saved my life. I was a pretty depressed kid. I was a pretty anxious kid. I was plagued with the fears that most kids are plagued with, but I was, pretty consumed with the bondage of self, for most of my childhood. As a matter of fact, drinking is the thing that made me come out and want to play with you, to be honest. Before that, I was kind of, bound up in myself. Pretty sure that I didn't fit, pretty sure that I didn't have the right shoes. I didn't have the right parents. I didn't have the right school, education, interests. I felt I was plagued with fear, and our third step prayer talks about the bondage of self. And I had that way before I took a drink. At 4 years old, my parents divorced, and that was a big turning point in my life because I got my first resentment at 4 years old, and it was against my mother for leaving my dad. My dad was everything, man. He was my hero. He is not sober. He's doing the same stuff that he did when I was a young kid, but he seems to be living his life fine. He is very proud of the weed he grows. He smokes pot all day. He golfs. He lives in Florida. He's a cool guy. He's always been a cool guy. My dad's house, my mom ended up marrying a man that was in a different class than us. We grew up in Southern Indiana. My parents both worked in factories, and my mom ended up marrying a man who was a senior vice president of a pharmaceutical company. So we went from shift work, two parents, one working days, one working nights, to my mom marrying this man who whisked us off to another state. And all of a sudden, it felt like it happened overnight. We were in this whole new family, and I had this whole new set of rules, and there was cotillion, and there was country clubs, and there was white tablecloths, and there was, company vacations. There was this whole new world. It was a class change. And I literally hated every part of it. I resented it. I resented my mom for leaving my dad. I cried for like maybe the first year and a half of their marriage. I cried almost every day. And I remember being in like kindergarten, and my mom had taken me to a Christian school because she thought that would be helpful for me, because I had obviously some emotional issues. I mean, really, I was having a lack of acceptance, right? I was fighting the new reality that I found myself in, and I was super bummed out about it. And I let it show, because I didn't know how to manage my emotions, as most 4-year-olds can't. And I remember it at that church school that the ladies, like the church lady, the principal of school actually took me down into the chapel and put me on her lap and let me cry and rocked me and said a prayer for me. And I remember that nobody had ever prayed on me or with me before until that moment. And I remember I felt better. And I mean, at 4 years old, I remember this feeling. I think this woman probably would have been sued today for doing that, but back then it was okay to do. And I'm grateful she did it, because it was my first planted seed that, like, I don't know, that like maybe there was a God or something. I knew that it's come back in my memory many times as like one of those awakenings that I had, that like, wow, there's a correlation between this woman letting me cry, rocking me and praying with me in this sacred space and me feeling better. So, anyway, around about that time, I would get to visit my dad whenever he would, get custody of me on the weekends. And my dad is a drinker. I mean, he's a big drinker. I drank with him from the time I was 4 years old. I mean, I always remember sipping his beer. It was my favorite thing in the world. He always had a cooler beer in the back seat. He always had a beer in between his legs, and I would get to sip some of it. At 5 or 6 years old, when I'd be going on trips to his house, they taught me how to light the cigarettes at the party. And that was my favorite job because, I wasn't old enough to drink yet, but I was like at his adult parties. And I remember being like super attracted to the power of booze, even though I wasn't drinking it, because the energy in the room changed. The people, as people started drinking and the party started happening, the room got smokier, the music got louder, everybody seemed like they were having a really good time. And I got to be a little part of that. And I couldn't wait to get old enough till I got to smoke cigarettes and I got to drink. And I did have sips of beer, but I never felt the effects produced by alcohol. That didn't come until a few years later, and not very many years later, to be honest. I remember being about 10 years old when I got drunk for the first time. And it was on a glass of Reuniti red wine at my dad's house. My mom didn't drink. So the only time I was really exposed to alcohol and other stuff was when I was visiting on these trips with my dad. And I remember having this cup of wine, and I loved the taste of alcohol. I always liked the taste of beer and wine, always. I knew that when I smelled it on somebody's breath, that I had a feeling of like, there was a little bit of fear there, but then there was also that little bit of excitement. I have some Al-Anon in me too. So like I'm both simultaneously, excited by and terrified of the smell of booze on somebody's breath. But I remember this night I was allowed to drink, and I drank a whole cup of wine, like, a decent sized cup. And I felt for the first time the magic effect of alcohol on my body. It changed everything about who I was in that moment and everything that I ever felt. Like I felt free for the first time in my life. I got excited about it. I remember being like, whoa, like I intuitively knew, like I knew exactly why the drunks, like why the adults drank. I understood the first time I felt the effects. And with like 2 seconds of peace, the very next thought was, I should sneak back upstairs and fill up this cup before they know I've had more than one. I'm only allowed to have one. So I did. Snuck back up, had 2 cups of wine, got loaded that night. First time drunk by myself. Last time I drank was by myself too. And in between those 2 drinks was a whole lot of action. I mean, that's the one thing I could count on when I drank, was that it would be exciting. And it was always exciting. I quickly, found, when I came back from that trip visiting my dad, I found the kids in the neighborhood, they were my people. I found the older kids that had cars. I was a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid. And like these teenagers in the neighborhood were supposed to be my babysitters, but they would end up taking me to college parties. They would take me to keg parties. Like I had a lot of fun with these kids, and the adults trusted them in the neighborhood, but I don't know. I was bad. I mean, I can't even, my poor mother, when I think about the stuff that I put her through, because in the very beginning, it was like super fun, no consequences, a lot of getting loaded every chance I got, totally became my hobby. It was almost instantly, I was kind of not interested in the swim team anymore. I was kind of not interested in, playing in my fort in the woods anymore. I was ready to like go with the older kids down to the NC State campus and go to these parties at these frat houses and whoever was having a party. And my drinking, it was really fast. Like I didn't ease into it. I heard some people before the meeting talking about, being late bloomers or late drinkers and mine was so quick, man. I like started getting loaded. It became a necessity. It was like the only thing I was really interested in was like the next time I could get loaded, trying to figure out who was going to buy it, how we were going to get money, or if I could steal it, which I became a very good thief quickly. At 12, 13 years old, I was walking across to the grocery store. And in North Carolina, where I grew up, you could buy beer and wine in the grocery store. And I could just walk right in with my tiny little body and my little clothes with a big jacket. And I could shove two liters California Cooler. I don't know if you guys remember that stuff, but it tasted like Kool-Aid pretty much. And I could shove it in my jacket and just walk out holding it. And I'd, go out and drink in the fort by myself. I mean, sometimes if I didn't have friends around, I'd be just fine drinking in my fort or my tree house or, whatever. I love the effects produced by alcohol. I loved it so much that I was willing to compromise any values I had, anything I was taught as a child. Don't be a thief. Don't lie. Don't sneak out. Don't hang out with those bad kids. All that stuff, like those warnings that I had, I ignored. I went for who had what. And the party started. And all I wanted to do was stay loaded and get loaded and stay loaded. I mean, it just became my total focus. And I ended up, I started getting in trouble. The consequences started very quickly, as they do. I was a kid. I was a teenage alcoholic. And so I started doing teenage dumb things and getting caught doing dumb things and getting in trouble. And I stole a school. I was a bad kid. I was always been kind of a ringleader. So, I get the friend, my friends to do bad stuff with me, like steal cars and steal school buses and like get in trouble, and then they'd go and brag about it. And then we'd all get caught, like that kind of stuff. I remember being in middle school and being picked up by the North Carolina State Department of Corrections, whatever that teenage, the juvie van would come and pick us up to go clean the state, the highways for our community service. Like I was for stealing a school bus, I was like a legend, and I loved the attention of being bad. And I loved that I was so brave and that, people were like, ooh, she's a bad girl. And I kind of liked that attention. Even though I really didn't want to get in trouble, I just always found myself in trouble. So at 13 years old, as my punishment for being pretty much feral, my poor mother was like trying to right at the time I turned 13, my mom found Jesus. My mom started going to church. She had her own spiritual awakening and her life completely changed. And as a result of her life changing, she all of a sudden started being more of a mother than she'd ever been to me. And I found that quite objectionable because I pretty much raised myself from the time I was 10 until I was 13 because my mom was busy, having her own awakenings. She was drinking a lot of booze. She was out dating. She was dancing. She was starting a career. Like, she was doing her thing. And I was pretty much left to my own devices. And at 13, after Jesus entered the picture, all of a sudden I'm getting carted off to therapists and I'm getting carted off to rehab. And I ended up in my first rehab at 13 where I met You Find People. So people came in and brought a meeting. And I could not have been more uninterested in what they were selling because what they were selling me was total abstinence and 100% sobriety and also God and also 12 steps. And I was not interested. I could not have been more uninterested at that time. And, I went to another 6 rehabs before I finally started to go, maybe it was like rehab 4 that I actually put myself in. I found myself, the disease progresses, and I had the disease, I think, way before I started drinking because so many of my family members do. My mom would just warn me all the time, like you're just like your dad. Like you are just like my dad. You remind me of my uncle. Like all the bad alcoholics in my family that were bad boys, I was kind of following in their footsteps and I didn't know it. And I didn't understand what that meant. I'd go to these rehabs and I would get sober for a minute. I'd be completely physically sober. And as soon as I would get out of the protective environment of being in a rehab place, as soon as I got back out on the street, it was like, then the anxiety started. Then the being sober, being uncomfortable about it started. And I would find myself taking that first drink. And I always thought every single time, I had that belief that it was going to be different this time, that it wasn't going to end up, I wasn't going to end up doing the things that really compromised my values that I was really ashamed of, and as my disease progressed, I continued to find those things that were so shameful to me acceptable. I started crossing lines in the sand and crossing over those lines. I draw a line in the sand. I'm not going to do this. I'm never going to try drugs like that. I won't ever hang out with those kind of people. And one by one, I'm hanging out with bikers. I'm doing really hard drugs. I'm hanging out with some really scary people. And like, I know that this is not what I want. I wanted to go back to being that innocent kid in the woods drinking and having a good time. And it was like I was trying to stop this train that was already off the tracks. Like it was already going and I could not stop it. And so I think rehab number 4 or 5, I actually put myself in because I was like, I don't want to do drugs anymore. I do not want to be a drug addict. My body was addicted to drugs and I did not like the drugs I was doing. I didn't like the people I had to deal with to do those drugs. And I just didn't like anything about it. It made me feel really terrible. And so I had it in my mind that somehow, some way I was going to be able to control and enjoy my drinking, that I was going to be able to let go of the drugs and I was going to be able to control and enjoy my drinking. And I would get out of that. I remember getting out of that rehab, going through the withdrawal, and my mind was set that I was going to figure out how to drink like a lady, and I didn't have a whole lot, I didn't have a whole lot of those experiences where I drank against my will, where I really could see this, the craving, the physical craving, the mental obsession. I didn't have a whole lot of those, but when I was qualified for the first step, my sponsor just a few years ago was like, all right, tell me how you know you're an alcoholic. Like, let me know. Do you have the allergy? Like, what happens to you when you take the first drink? I'm like, then it's on. I wouldn't even take the first drink. And I knew this well before anybody ever in AA ever tried to qualify me as an actual allergic type. I knew that if I was hanging out somewhere and somebody had 140-ounce beer and there was 4 people and we were supposed to share it, I wouldn't even take the first drink because it would just make me furious. And I would be so upset because I would have had a little bit of alcohol and not enough. I just wouldn't even start, and I knew that back then, that once I started, I was going to just go with it. It was going to be, usually it was fun. I used to have a lot of fun and a lot of adventures. I hitchhiked all over the country. I followed the Grateful Dead around. I left home at 15 and followed the Grateful Dead. I had a lot of great adventures out there. And my first time I ever had the morning drink, because I knew that meant you were really bad off, because all my friends that drank in the morning were old people. They were like 18 years younger than I am now. They were old people when they drank in the morning to kill their hangovers. And the first time I had the morning drink was at a Dead show. And I realized, like, holy shit, I am now no longer in North Carolina. I am in Madison Square Gardens on a Dead lot. And like, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little scared. I know what to do with that. I can drink this Samuel Smith oatmeal stout and have breakfast and my day will begin, and so it was just a whole lot of me trying to roll around with the first step. I kept hearing, you guys kept coming into my life. Alcoholics Anonymous kept coming into my life. People would pick me up from these rehabs and take me to meetings. Sometimes people would pick me up and take me to take me to meetings outside of this rehab that had tattoos, that knew my old friends, that like listened to the same kind of music I listened to. That stuff was really important to me. Back then it was really important for me to not lose my whole identity. And it was good for me to see people that were sober and also still liking the music I liked. Like, there was just these certain things that held me back. And in 1994, August of 1994, my little fun drinking and my adventure of drinking turned into living in an abandoned house in West Baltimore. I had lice, I had dreadlocks, I was filthy, I hadn't bathed in months. I didn't care about bathing. I had no hope. I had no hope that I was ever going to have a life that amounted to anything, like on a grand scale, but on a small scale, I never believed that I could ever be sober and happy at the same time. And I kept getting the same message year after year, rehab after rehab, 12-step meeting after 12-step meeting, that like, if you be a real alcoholic, you will drink again. You will get so uncomfortable sober, you will drink again. And at that stage of my life, I couldn't imagine being comfortable with or without booze anymore. Like, I couldn't choose whether I was going to drink or not. It was really a very miserable experience. And I wanted to die. I remember my first prayers were, begging God to kill me. Like, please let me not wake up. I don't want to wake up. I don't want to go through another day of this. And in 1994, on some level, on some way, I cried out for God's help. I asked God. I'd never asked God. I got stabbed once. I think I said a prayer then because I woke up, stabbed, car wrecks, every time I almost died, I would say a prayer. Every time something really, really, really bad happened to me, I think my intuitive thought was to say a prayer. And I think that's inside of our DNA. And I love how Bill tries to sell us that in We Agnostics, that like inside every one of us is this fundamental idea of God. And it was always when I was about to lose my life that I actually would call on that power, thinking of having a living and working relationship with a higher power, like all day long, every day. That sounded crazy to me, because as soon as I would get out of that jackpot, I just kind of forget about it. And what happened at the end of my drinking was that I started begging God to help me, and God came, because that's what I've learned about prayer here, is that when you pray, man, stuff happens. It has been true for me my whole sobriety and my whole sobriety, when really somebody told me how important it was for me to find a higher power. That if I wanted to stay sober, I was going to have to start asking a power, even if I didn't trust that power or believe in that power, to keep me sober that day, because I was not going to have the power to stay sober on my own. And I believe that. I knew from experience that while I wanted to stay sober, I wanted to get out of the life. My dream was always like, I want to have a normal life. I want to be normal. I want to go to the grocery store. I want to have a bank account. I want to have an herb garden. I want to have like sheets on my bed that are clean. I want a place to live that has electricity. You know what I mean? I wanted some normalcy in my life, and I crave these things. And yet I could not get close to that. I was not employable when I was drinking. I just couldn't work. I couldn't make it to work. The failures that mounted up while I was drinking were just, palatable. And everybody in my life was like, yo, you got a problem. You're a bad alcoholic. And I drank with bad alcoholics, and they were like, yeah, maybe it's good that you stop, that you go to rehab. You know what I mean? It was kind of, and my mom, and everybody kept saying you are it's problem, it's bad. And I finally believed that enough to ask God for help. And when I did that, and I started to take some simple actions, which, the first action I was told was, I called a woman in the program, and I'm like, can you please help me? I don't know how to, I can't stop. I want to stop. And I pick up every single time. I swear I'm not gonna. And she's like, can you get to this hospital and talk to this doctor and say these things? And this woman met me on a stoop in Baltimore, gave me the name of a hospital, pen and paper, old school. And I walked to the hospital and said those things. And it was like, all of a sudden, it seemed like favor and fortune. That sounds really genie-like I rubbed a genie lamp and the genie came out and granted all my wishes, but that's kind of how it feels. I feel like a millionaire without $1 million. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm over freaking paid as a result of this life. And it started right then. I walked to the hospital and I said the things. And I remember for the first time in years laying on that clean hospital bed, realizing how filthy I was. I could smell I was just dirty. I was very dirty. And I remember feeling peace laying in that bed going, this might be it. If you just hang on, this might be it. And, and my whole life has been just this magic ever since then, ever since 94. September 1st is the first full day I have about anything in my body. And it happens to be my mom's birthday, which is sacred, very sacred. I've almost lost that sobriety date many times in the past 28 years because I have alcoholism. I got a really bad case of alcoholism, meaning, what it's like, but I have a mind powered disease that's really there and alive in me. I have to do some things consistently to keep it at bay. I got to do a lot of things actually. And they're not a chore. It's a pleasure to sit down and take pen and paper and write for a little bit. And my sponsor's a big person, telling me to write, telling me to meditate, telling me to, pray, meditate, inventory. Those three things are the unshakable foundation for life, they say in the 12 and 12. And there's part of my morning practice and evening practice is writing in a journal, asking God for help, meditating on purpose, taking that time, carving out that time. And, the book talks about the time it takes to prime ourselves to go out in the world and navigate other people. Cause I'm fine when I'm by myself, but my problems arise when I get around other people. As soon as I go outside, then it's people-y out there. I gotta drive around people. I gotta, walk down the street next to people. I have to like pass people in traffic. I have to talk to people, and that's when the problems start. And I need help with that stuff. I need a higher power in my life to soften my edges. I needed these 12 steps to like show me who and what I am, and to help me be at peace with who and what I am and who and what I can be again. I needed to get a clear picture of my character defects, which, my sponsor is like kind of a magical being. And when she hears a fifth step, she like has this sweet little ritual where she kind of doodles and draws and gets all these pins out. And she literally like makes this beautiful picture of all the character defects that she hears as you're doing your reading, and like draws them large and pretty, even though it's like, self-reliant. It's like all the defects, right? And it makes it not so uncomfortable, to kind of face those things. Realizing that like I couldn't do this alone, man. Like that was something that I had self-knowledge about. Like I knew I needed the meetings. I kind of fell in love with AA right after I got out of that last rehab. At that point I had surrendered to the fact that like, I'm going to try to do this. Like one day at a time, I'm going to pray and ask God to keep me sober. And I'm going to go to these meetings, because by this time I would find peace in the meetings. I'd find comfort in the meetings. 1 hour a day, my mind would actually turn off. 1 hour a day, I could actually just sit still and be present. And like, I was really attracted to like old timey AA meetings. And I still am, like the meetings that had a lot of people that, were my grandparents' age. Those people, I had green hair, I had a million piercings all over me and tattoos everywhere. And those people welcomed me. They were kind to me. They didn't bother me. I didn't feel like anybody was going to hurt me. And that was a gift, because I know other people don't have that experience. But I had a very sacred early sobriety experience where people just let me sit and be in the room, and I felt safe there. And every day it was like, I went to at least 2 meetings a day. It was all I could do in my 24-hour period to like make it 10 hours between the meeting. I needed, or 8 hours, however many hours it was. And little by slowly, I started to be employable. Little by slowly, I started to, get a job in my home group. I celebrated my first year. I'll never forget my first year sober. I cried the entire hour. I could barely speak. I was so grateful, because I couldn't believe that it had worked, that following what you guys told me to do worked. And prayer was and still is a huge part of that. It always has been. Like I have to consciously have a conversation and communicate with my higher power, like a lot, throughout the day. And it's not so scary anymore. Back then I still had a lot of, I was young. I had a lot of ego. I mean, I think we all do. We come in like not wanting to like let AA, brainwash us into being like, I don't know, what's like soldiers or what, not soldiers, like, followers. Like I always didn't want to be a follower, but man, I just like fell in love with the band of misfit toys that were AA. I mean, what a cast of characters. The guys that I got sober with were like skid row bums, like low bottom alcoholics. And those are the guys that I related to the most, because I drank like that. I drank like them. At the end of my drinking, I was totally fine with living in a tent or an abandoned house or whatever. I was totally okay with like being as far as I could possibly get away from society, and living in subculture. Like I was totally fine with that, because I was terrified to face life. I didn't know that I was so afraid. I was afraid to try. And AA really, like the largest, I guess the word that really comes up is the word try. Like you guys gave me the power to try for the first time. I gave up everything when it was uncomfortable, when I was drinking and before I started drinking. I was on the swim team and I would go to practice, but I would never go to a meet because I was too afraid to compete. I would practice for something or I wanted to be on a winning team. I was always on like a loser team. I just wanted to quit. I wanted to do karate. My mom made me do gymnastics. I had a resentment about that and I quit. I just didn't want to do it. And I quit. I gave up on a lot of stuff. And if it got hard, I didn't have the fortitude to like push through. I wasn't one of those kind. Now sober, I have become a risk taker, a trier, and a winner, which is weird. Like, it is weird to me to have found out at 4 years sober I'm an artist. I had no idea that was part of my truth. I never took an art class. Even in high school, all my friends took to art classes, but I never took one because I thought that artists had to be able to draw. I still can't draw, but I can paint, and I can paint weird stuff, and people like to buy it, and it's weird. And it's beautiful. I run a company today. I never in a million years would have seen this coming, but I bumbled around my first 5, 6, 7 years of sobriety, doing odd jobs and just making sure I could get to meetings. And I still make sure I can get to meetings. It's super important for me to make sure I get to meetings. I make my sponsee appointments. I make my time with my sponsor. I have a home group. I'm a GSR in the home group, which is an awesome new adventure. I'm actually a nerd. I didn't know that. I am an AA total nerd. Like, I love a contra study. I am obsessed with the long form of traditions. Like, I went to the GSR, area service meeting, and I sat there for all those hours, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, I love knowing more about the service structure and getting to know them. I joined my home group because it's a solid 3 legacy group, and it was the first women's meeting that they think ever was established. It's been operating for 80 something years now, and it's a 3 legacy group, man. Like, we study traditions. Like, it's got we have a lot of young sobriety there. It's pretty awesome. A lot of old timers and a lot of young people. It's a perfect little microcosm of AA as a whole, and I really look forward to Wednesday nights when I can meet my home group. I love traveling. I have a profession that allows me to travel quite a bit, and we'll move into a city for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, and I'll go to AA meetings. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't imagine my life without it, and it's so bizarre because those 10th step promises have truly come true for me. After I worked the steps, I started to get free in a way that I never saw possible. Like, I'm very comfortable in my sober skin. It's really rare that the thought of a drink comes. It's come. It's happened a lot. I mean, I've had those tugs when it's always when I'm emotionally off. It's always when I'm spiritually or emotionally like weak and I haven't been taking care of myself in that way, or there's something emotionally happening that, like, the thought of a drink feels like, or looking at somebody else drinking, seeing others drinking with impunity, is when it starts to, like, speak at me. It helps me remember, that this thing is still alive and kicking in me, and it has to be treated, and it has to be treated today and the day that I'm in. I bumbled around AA. I've bumbled around AA for a long time, but at 17 years sober is when I really had my spiritual, like a second surrender, a real spiritual kind of awakening, where I, started to really believe that my life on my will was not successful, and that I really needed a God in my life. Because in my early sobriety, it was just, I was flooded with the power of my higher power. Every day sober, I couldn't believe I had made it through it. Every fear that I walked through, every, job interview, or, the first time I secretaried a meeting, or, all the things that terrified me, which was literally everything. I would just pray all day long, and I was getting through stuff, and things were becoming really good in my life. And somewhere along, between like 2 and 3 years of sobriety is when I literally started easing God out. I was a 20 something year old, and I'm growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm trying to stay sober, and I'm looking at my peers, and I'm resentful that they can drink, and I know that I can't drink anymore, and that sucks. And like, I was, bummed out, and looking back, I realized how close to not being here I was, being envious, being, starting to get cop a bunch of resentments, and not really understanding how vital it is to stay current in the work. So I'm getting resentful. I'm getting full of fear. I'm pretty much sponsoring myself. At 17 years sober, I had 30 something sponsors, because it was always something was wrong with the sponsor, right? So none of those people worked me through all 12 steps, by the way. I stopped at about step 5. Never went home and did the second half of the 5th step. Never really understood quite what my character defects were, and never did the 9th step. And I didn't do that for 17 years. And so for you guys that are current in the work, you know how bad that is. Like, I was really not okay. Like, my sobriety was really uncomfortable, and it was really, page 52 really sums it up, those bedevilments, man. I was depressed. I was very focused on money, property, and prestige. Like, I was focused on all the wrong stuff, right? I was focused on all the third dimensional stuff that I thought I really needed. And what I really needed was the surrender and a God in my life, and being willing to walk through the rest of the steps. And thank God, that was painful. I mean, it was painful to get broken, and to get reasonable with a bunch of sobriety. I saw other people in the rooms like having that freedom. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I am not free, man. I am not free like that. And a course of events, which I would, if I had another hour, I would tell you all of that. I mean, just that story is probably a good hour, but I ended up at a big book retreat. And I showed up to this big book retreat. If this gives you any indication of how my sobriety was. I was dating a newcomer who had way better sobriety than me. And we go to this big book retreat because they're going. And I show up with my bicycles, my very fancy, very expensive bicycles. I need you to all know that I have expensive shit, right? So I've got these bikes, and I'm not trying to sit at an AA meeting all weekend. We're in the mountains. I'm going to go ride my bike, right? Like, I was so not interested in the big book study. I didn't even bring a big book. And what happened was, I went into, this is how completely crazy I was. And I go into the first night of this retreat, and this man starts sharing, and he starts doing what we all do, what happens in AA meetings every day, all day long. He starts sharing his experience with the first 3 steps. And I didn't touch those bikes the rest of the weekend. I didn't leave that seat the rest of the weekend. I was hanging on to the edge of my seat with my mouth open, like, what is he saying? What is he saying? Like, I don't even know what he's saying. Like, I don't understand how the big book was coming alive, right? We've all heard that. Like, we've all heard that saying. Like, the big book started to come alive for me, and I started to realize, like, I started to have a spiritual awakening. And it's really amazing because I had no idea how lost I was. I knew that my sobriety was pretty uncomfortable, and I knew that I had a lot of wreckage in my past, and I had a lot of broken relationships, and I couldn't make a living, and I was full of fear, and I was depressed, and people didn't like me. They wanted to stay away from me because I was angry. People were scared of me. And that night, Brian shared, and I didn't move, and I didn't leave that seat the rest of the weekend. And as a matter of fact, when Sunday came, I started to get sad because I didn't want it to end, because I had heard something that had depth and weight, and my sobriety did not have depth and weight. And I went to that cabin, and I got on my knees, and I said probably the first honest prayer I'd said in years, like a real prayer. And I sobbed and cried, and I said things to God that I would have never said before, because I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't trust God. I didn't think I could trust God. I thought that I was a special kind of broken. All alcoholics think we're special, right? Special kind of different. And I said things like, God, change me, like, fix me, change me, do whatever you want with me. I was so afraid to utter those words because, like, I didn't trust that was going to be favorable to me. Which, that just shows you the arrogance of it. I wasn't humble. And I was humble because I knew that this guy was free in a way that I was not, that I wanted so bad. I was willing to do anything. And I'm so grateful for that, because I feel like God saved me twice, because I found somebody to work me through the steps at that retreat, and we started to work the steps. And within 4 months of that experience, my entire sobriety changed, my entire life changed. And I started the work of step 9. I started to really see myself in inventory. I had so much resentment. And I had so much wreckage. I had all the stuff that I did when I was drinking, plus all the stuff I had done while I was sober. Like I wasn't cleaning house, you know. I sponsored one person in 17 years. I heard one fifth step in 17 years. That is so sad. I heard two fifth steps this past weekend. Like, is one of my favorite things in the world is to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, actively being sponsored and sponsoring others. It was like the biggest gift in the world, but I didn't have anything to offer. And what happened as a result of working the steps and walking through the terrifying, sometimes humbling experience of step 9, man, my whole life changed. And those 9 step promises that you read, like every one of them have come true for me. It's not that I have all the money, you know, like I love that thing, how we all come to AA and we like want the promises to come true, but we don't, we like, I want to work the promises and like, not the steps. Like, you know, I want the promises, you know, especially the money one, you know? And it's so funny because what's shifted in me is not that I have a ton of money. It's just that I don't want any more. Like I don't need any more. I'm happy with what I have. I'm blown away by what I've been able to do as a sober woman, thanks to my higher power. It's the wildest feeling to feel mostly at peace, you know, and when I get an opportunity to share my experience and share my story, you know, it really brings it back for me. It's a gift to be able to do anything for AA, especially this. This is the easiest thing I can do, honestly. Some of the other stuff takes a little more effort, but like, you know, I'm currently like going through the work again, and, you know, I'm in a really cool place in my development. You know, I know we're running out of time, but you know, the past 11 years of my sobriety have been the best years of my life. They have been the most meaningful years of my life. I started to learn how to be in relationships with others. Like that was something I always neatly avoided. You know, my favorite visual of like my character defects is like a little girl skipping through a wheat field, like a dry wheat field, lighting matches and like just letting them fly. And it's just burning all behind me, you know, just burning and burning. And I'm just like, la, 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 not paying any attention. Like today, you know, there's not a giant field burning for the most part. There's like a little tiny fire, you know, and I've had some fires today. I've had to do some uncomfortable stuff today. I've had to be a boss today. I've had to, you know, call out one of my senior artists today. And, you know, he's upset. He's not happy that I needed him to, you know, I got some boss lady hard stuff to navigate through. And I want to do it in a loving way that reflects that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right. And that is like, is very important to me, to not be an idiot out there in the world. It's very important for me to try to, you know, practice the principles in all my affairs. And I try to do that, and I try to remain teachable. And when I'm doing these little disciplines that my sponsor is like super big on, and I've been kind of just doing what she's doing, which is what we do here a lot of times, you know, we do a lot of writing, we do a lot of prayer meditation, and that has been really helpful for me to like turn it over. You know, I'll tell you one more quick story and then I'll be quiet. Do I talk till 9 or do I stop it a few minutes before? Probably 9. Sorry, Stephen.
You're good to go.
Okay. So one of my favorite things to do is I still use a God box. I love using a God box. Somebody taught me that in early sobriety and it made sense. I don't have a problem just talking to God. But lately I've started praying on my knees again. Today my sponsor reminded me, she's like, you should pray on your knees today. I'm like, okay. And I did it. And I'm like, why don't I do this all the time? Because every time I get in that posture is very good for me. It is very good for a person with an ego like mine to get on my knees and talk to God. But I also put things in this God box. And usually around New Year, I like to go through it. And it's a vase, and it gets full of things that I am really having trouble with: jobs, drama at work, you know, whatever. I drop stuff in there. Anything that's like bothering me or people I care about in the rooms, like whatever. I put the names in there. Usually around New Year's, I like to make a fire in the morning and I'll open up all those things that I dropped in that box over the year, and I'll read them, and I'll remember where I was when I dropped those things in this box that I was afraid of or wanted God to take. And every single time and every year, I'm like amazed that like every single thing got handled. There was a solution when I couldn't see anything but a problem. You know, that's the Jedi mind trick of AA, man. It's like, you guys remind me that there is a solution to every problem. You know, my mind is a problem making machine. And like, you guys are the ones that keep me on the path and on the beam mentally and spiritually to be like, hey, yo, you're clearly holding on to this again. Like, you're definitely fighting the flow. Why don't you stop trying to force solutions and get quiet for a minute? Stop doing stuff. Just sit down for a minute. You know, I don't know where I'd be without Alcoholics Anonymous. I think most of us on this call, I mean, there's people all over this country. It's really cool to see, you know, you guys in these little boxes. Like, so much of my heart is so engaged in these little boxes. I Zoom in almost every day with my sponsor, and some people, she does a little morning meditation, 30-minute quick call in the morning. And I feel so close to the women in the men that are in those boxes. Like, I see them almost every morning. I hear them share about stuff. Like, it's really important. You know, Zoom was a big deal for me. It was really a gift. It's really powerful to watch us old drunks learn how to use some new tricks. Like, that was very important. The first weekend of shutdown, there was an international conference, like hundreds of people, thousands of people were on that Zoom call. Probably some of you guys were too. And I was so like, I felt so much hope that like we weren't gonna fall apart. You know, we were gonna stay together. We were gonna figure this out. And I know if I'm in the middle of the boat with you guys, I'm gonna be safe. You know, one of my home groups is a Zoom meeting that meets twice a week called the Uncanny Understanding Group. And it's one of my favorite things in the world on Friday mornings to Zoom in and like here we talk about steps, we talk about the daily reflections, and it's a really great meeting. And half the time, I mean, I met a lot of these people in person since meeting them on Zoom, and that's a joy too. So I hope to see some of you all as we trudge this road of happy destiny together. I am super, super stoked to be here tonight. And I thank you, Stephen, for asking me, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I appreciate you sharing with us. A very heartfelt share. I know I got a lot out of it, and I saw in my Hollywood squares a lot of people identifying with what you said, and I'm assuming you belong to an organization that I belong to, Wharf Rats. You know, nothing left to do. Nothing left to do but smile, smile, smile. You know, there's a bunch of rats on this Zoom tonight. You know, so. You know, we alone can do it, but we can't do it alone. So remind everybody that about the meeting after the meeting. If you're having an issue or problem, you're thinking about taking a drink, doing any dope or harming yourself or something, please stick around for the meeting after the meeting and let us know what's going on. Kelly, was recorded. If you subscribe to the Ponderables, I put a link in the chat on how to subscribe. Try that, you'll get it tomorrow. If you want a copy, not subscribe to this morning email I send out, just make a request in the chat. You'd like a copy of her share. I think it's one a lot of people are going to want to share with people they sponsor and their friends in AA.